Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. The Grant. My name is Niels Tutter Winter, and I'm the creator, editor, and host of The Grant. The Grant is an independent podcast initiative with the ambition to dig into all corners of the EU R&D funding system on topics of interest for the full EU R&D funding community. Impact is a recurring topic in this podcast, and for good reason. It keeps being a sore spot for many proposal and project managers to fold out and get the expected and desired outcome. Christopher Adlung reached out to me to suggest a podcast episode zooming in on the fact that complex societal challenges require new forms of collaboration in order to get the proper impact from EU-funded projects. Christopher is a PhD researcher at Technical University in Delft and has beside this a holding company supporting the medical technical sector to adopt better new technologies. In this conversation, we dig into how to involve all the stakeholders, the challenges, and the importance of getting real impact. And in all practicalities, Christopher shares examples from Bangladesh and Africa where he is involved in innovation and impact initiatives. This is a great episode. Please enjoy. Grant. Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. Now, today we're going to have a conversation here on a recurring topic. And the reason why it's recurring is because so many people are working with it out there. We're going to talk about impact. And sometimes I have people reaching out to join me as guests, and that's exactly what I want to do. I want people to reach out because creating content, it's important for me to have people to reach out to me if there's something they want to share. And Christopher, you did that. Welcome. Now we're going to talk impact, and we're going to talk about your take on this. But first, and before anything else, can you please shortly introduce yourself for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. My name is Christopher. I have a few hats on, as I like to say. Mm-hmm. So one hat is that I'm a PhD researcher at a technical university in Delft, in which I look into the adoption and the implementation and the scale up of a thing called telemedicine, which is basically something that we do right now, just with a medical activity involved. And I look at this in the context of low resource settings. And I hope we dive into that a little bit later. Mm-hmm. But as a second hat, I do have the hat of a founder and a CEO of a holding structure and a holding company in the Netherlands in which we support and consult medtech companies, investors, and also hospitals in a European setting to adopt their medical equipment in a better way. So we have less redundancy and less obsolete items and improve the sustainability aspects on the European level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. You'll be able to give examples concerning this, because we're going to talk about the issue that is always with impact and EU funding and EU projects is what happens when the projects they finish. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it is, of course, an issue. It remains the issue with funding to make sure that what is being thrown of taxpayers' money after all this funding is something that actually have a real impact, something that can really make a difference in real life, because too many things sit and doesn't happen when funding is gone. And then this idea of handling the end of a project. So to get exactly this, so strategically and practically, we need to make sure that something comes out in the other end. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Christoph, maybe we just jump straight into the first block here. So, and we labeled that the traditional funding model, and where does it fall short? So, What have you dotted down of notes on this?
Mm-hmm. Now, first of all, I would say it's not just an EU phenomenon that we're talking about. I think it's a global phenomenon in the sense that if there is taxpayers' money that you want to spend on research, I think it's a great idea. It's necessary. It's doing good for the society, and if you can expect a certain benefit and a certain return, so to speak, for the society, that's great. I think what happened in the last, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years that I can at least observe it more concretely, also from different standpoints, and I'm happy to talk about that, is to say, well, maybe that return is not coming anymore in that intensity as we desired it to be. And the second thing is that the budgets, the funding budgets, the pockets that we used to have in the sense of spending money on it, is to some degree getting bigger, you could say. I mean, the potential budgets that you can apply for are getting technically bigger, depending on where you look at. If you look at aggregated funding on a European level, the financials are quite tremendous. But the question is also how effective or how likely it is to receive funding from a research standpoint. And I think these two pillars pretty much describe very, very well where we stand today. And I hope to get with you, Niels, into a discussion where we can creatively shape that from a systems point of view, because I don't think it's an institutional or an organizational challenge. It's more a systematic challenge.
So first of all, if we look at the funding side of this, it's very simple. You have let's just take a technology. Yeah, you have technology, an innovation process, and you shape something. You want to de-risk it by applying for funding. If you look at the Horizon Pillar 2, the big collaboration projects, what often happens is that things get very big, so and there's a reason for that. It's because it's also social targets. So there are many things that the Commission wants with these calls. But for the individual organization as a partner, especially industry SMEs that has part of the technologies that are being worked on, they step in, and then you have a project that lasts for 3 to 4 years. And then in the first place, they had the technology. That's what they wanted, but it became very big. It became very long. Became a huge animal, a massive organization, so to say, of things concerning that. And then when they come out on the other side, maybe the company is not there anymore. Maybe they found out that they need to go a different strategic way with the innovation strategy that they have as an organization. Maybe, but there are many reasons for this. But what happens is, in all reality, is that the Commission can see that a lot of developed results are not being used. So they have dead patents. Yeah? So this is a symptom. Now I just gave an example. There can be many other examples of why things are not being used. But it's a real issue because it's systemic. There's something, because the company, of course, they want to develop the technology, because that's why they did this in the first place. But something happens in between. Yeah?
Yeah, what you're bringing up a lot of elements, I may say. Maybe to put out one in specific, what you just said in terms of usage is something very dear to me, and also my research, because usage in my world, in the scientific world, can be translated into adoption, into ad optio. In Latin, that means you can choose. It is to choosing. Let's consider any technology. Let's consider an MRI that is going to be researched. There are novel forms of MRI to be researched. And there's lots of funding available, and researchers are doing a great job, and everyone is happy with the technology. That mostly exists in labs. That mostly exists in a condensed version of reality. Yeah, and by that I mean people, like everyday people, maybe even doctors or nurses or medical staff, don't necessarily have direct exposure in the structure and in the development of that technology. Most of them might do. And another aspect is also the fact that if you think of a hospital organization, they don't consist of medical staff only. You have procurement people involved. You have C-level people involved. There are admin people. They're much more on the organizational, orchestrational level that are not concerned with the clinical part. So my point is, when you look at this as a system, you realize that you may invent a technology with a certain use case in mind that will come out, but once it gets used, meaning it gets put into practice, and people need, like I said, to choose that technology on their perspectives, things break. Yeah. To give a pragmatic example that I recently came up with, or discovered, a pacemaker in a heart clinic needs to be configured before it gets implemented in the patient's body. And I didn't know that there is a trained, well-equipped, developed staff involved to configure that kind of pacemaker. If that configuration goes bad, the entire surgery is gone wrong. So you may, as a medical device supplier, create a device that's amazing for the doctors, it's amazing for the patient, and even great for the ecosystem as a wider setup. But if you consider that one individual that is configuring that device properly, you're missing the whole point. And I think that is also the fundamental issue when we think of usage. We think of the usage for ourselves, and we think of the usage for a dedicated set of people, but we don't involve the wider ecosystem and stakeholders, the multi-agent stakeholders in the system that are also concerned with the same device.
But the thing, what puzzles me, and has puzzled me always, right? It is that, companies and industry, when they develop technologies themselves, it doesn't get into this kind of complexity. Mm-hmm. With they cannot all get EIC accelerator, right? They cannot all get an SME grant. So you have, even though there's a lot of money in the EU system, there's also a certain frame that you need to tap into if you want to de-risk with EU funding. Mm-hmm. And that often means that you need to, your focus get blurred. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if this is why many companies in countries that have good innovation support systems, they prefer national funding schemes because mm-hmm. it's easier and more simple to approach, because that's just what they need. Mm-hmm. So the point is, what I want to make is that if a company develops a technology themselves, if they have the funding, right? Mm-hmm. They make an innovation strategy for the specific project. If they have to involve external collaboration partners like research, whatever, they have channels for that. Mm-hmm. And then they make it and develop it, and then that's it. Mm. Yeah. And then they test it on the market, and they and if it doesn't work, they adjust or whatever. Yeah, mm-hmm. This happens all the time. But the problem for these kind of developments, also within medicine, where you are within health, is that when it gets too big, it's they get the prime actor that I see in this, the technology developer, right? It blurs out. There are too many things going on that they have to do, because that's the conditions for getting the funding. You need to do all kinds of things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking two different levels here. I think I refer to the micro level in terms of, okay, what stakeholders and people using XYZ innovation in a certain setting. Mm-hmm. But what you're referring to is absolutely valid, because when you, as an SME, want to develop a certain technology, either you look for funding on the private sector, you go for private investments, most funders that I know, they saved up money on their own, and then they come up with a minimum viable product to showcase, yeah, sure, it works in theory, but we need more funding and more money to really develop it. And by the way, the amount of money that you need to develop an MVP these days is in tendence, not for all industries and for all sectors, but is in tendence getting less, simply because of the use of AI and the technologies that we have readily on our hands today. So we can, in theory at least, create prototypes much faster. But what you're referring to, if I understand you correctly, Niels, is, well, once you have progressed through that TRL level, the technology readiness level 3, let's say, and you're getting into the noise, there you go. And you're getting into the application phase for a higher technology readiness level, then obviously you need much more funding, and you need more people, and you need things that you haven't even considered in the beginning. You may need a legal department, you need people who come up with marketing stuff, you need all kinds of different resources you haven't encountered in the beginning. And my point in all of this is, and I can say this also as a founder now for 2.5 years, you don't find by default the best funding vehicles on a larger scale. You don't. You have to be really creative. You have to get a huge network before you jump into a consortium. And when the consortium is built, as we all know, the idea needs to be fitted into the consortium, and that is an evolutionary process to go through. And sometimes the consortium falls apart. Sometimes the idea vanishes. And all of that is very challenging for an SME if you're considered, on a tight budget. A large corporation, I may say, and I think there is something that we should talk about. A large corporation can easily, comprehend a few $100,000 on the side and say, well, if we get the funding, it's great. If we don't, it's also fine. We have enough in the pocket. But for a small SME who's highly innovative and highly progressive and wants to produce and wants to create, some of the funding vehicles, and I hope we get to that a little bit more detailed, some of the funding vehicles are just not made for it. And there are a few reasons that I'm happy to outline and get into details with you.
So I think we will come to this. So we have our next section. We're going to talk about silos. But the only thing I want to say before we move into that is to concur with this, because with the experience I have and with the things that I've been doing over the years working with the framework programs, I must admit that I think the SMEs, especially the SMEs of this continent, would be much better off if you created a much larger pool of money that were easier access. So instead of having the framework program pillar 2, these huge amounts of money where you like 2, 3, 4 million, 5 million per consortia, right? For projects with 10 to 20 partners. And you even have those corners where you have 30 partners, 35 partners, 10 million euros. There's been my personal point of view from working with this throughout the years is that I think the commission has been too focused on moving big, and it was a discourse, I know, because I was sitting in the system and it was officially sort of coming out that the commission was moving toward larger projects with more partners and more money. But I don't honestly, I don't think that's the best strategy if you want to support the growth material, so to say, of the continent of SMEs that are the real drivers here, because the large industry, they'll be fine without funding.
That's what I'm saying.
It's okay, they can afford huge R&D departments, they can afford this. The real impact would be to get it, make it easier for SMEs, because EIC accelerator and success rates of 5 to 10%, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
But why not do both? I mean, first of all, I don't want to say that what the European Commission is doing is bad. I think what they're doing is very well intended, and I appreciate the opportunities that you can get through the funding opportunities at the Horizon, at the EIC and the EIT grants and everything. But it's also right to say, well, building these very little consortia and trying to receive that quite a lot of money for a small piece of the cake, like small amounts of consortium partners, is challenging. It's tremendously, and it's getting worse. It's not something that you can say, well, nowadays everyone is aligned and we're just applying for funding and we will receive the grant. That's not what happens. You can also see in the amount of applications being written, most of them are written by AI, or at least sort of AI. Right? So the demand is increasing tremendously. But let me get back to your proposal, because I think there's a lot of value in this. I would advocate for saying the European Commission is doing good in also supporting the way they do. But what if we just take, I don't know, an XYZ number, let's say 100 million. In the grand scheme of things, that is not a lot of money to consider. Let's take this 100 million and spread it either over Europe, or look at like innovation pockets across European countries, let's say Europe, and you just give that money in a certain amount, basically for free. So you have an application process which is minimal. It's not supposed to be a huge draft with a lot of, backing from XYZ consortium partners, but you apply, and there's a certain chance that you truly get the money if you're an SME in a European country and you want to provide XYZ innovation over 2 or 3 years. It should not be longer, I think, because the innovation needs to test and needs to prove itself before going further. But that application process is lean, it's agile, it's easy to make. The 100 million in the grand scheme of things don't really matter. But what comes out of that, the stimulation across the European countries, and also the attractiveness for further investments going into Europe because of that, is increasing. That would be my 5-cent pitch if I had a chance to to come in front of someone who makes this.
Keep that thought, because we are going to talk about new ways of organization of innovation. Yeah. So next block, let's move into that. So we label that beyond the silos, and whether we need new ways of organizing innovation. So it's as old as man. Yeah, the traditional separation between academia, industry, and public sector, right? This is the Bermuda Triangle, where everything disappears.
I like it. Never heard that, but yeah.
Now, what did you dot down here?
Well, let's find a good compass. Let's not get lost. Well, let me put it this way. What you say with public-private academic highly resonates with me, because each sector has built over time structures, organizational structures that worked. As in, you have a university. The university is mainly built for educating young scholars in a certain subject to get well equipped for a job market. That's the basic intent in the past. Well, I would say that will last, but the way that we educate young people in the future will drastically change. Look at a traditional student, and in any university, you will get the average answer that most students will consult all kinds of media and input from other sources outside of the university to get educated. So the question is, what role can universities play? My key take on and I make a blunt statement on this. My key take here is to say, well, that's the place where you come to learn from each other, and not just from the technology that's been given to you, in a much more social manner. And also, and this is me resonating on the very much ethical ideas, to say, look, young scholars, they don't look necessarily for knowledge. They look for knowing themselves. They want to know who they are in comparison to their peers. And that is what the university should stand for, and to some degree is, but it should be built much further into the future. And my point in the contrast of, let's say, a private organization is that's not the intent of a private organization. A private organization is incentivized by its stakeholders, depending on the size and the setup, to make money. To make money, to sustain itself, ideally to provide, not ideally, actually, it should provide a good product that the world needs. Otherwise, I would say, well, maybe we should look for a different business model. But
it's entrepreneurship.
It's entrepreneurship, right? So, and ideally, if the entrepreneurship goes well, you can employ people. You can employ the students that we just talked about. So there is a handshake, let's say. And to frame all this and to give it a structure in an encompassing way so everyone behaves properly, everyone is in its best shape, so to speak, you can say, well, that's what we need the public sector for. We need the framework around these kind of handshakes to make sure we all operate under a certain guideline, a certain policy that is making us better over time. And I think, and this is me openly speaking about this triangle, because you phrased it well by putting it a Bermuda Triangle to get lost. It is sometimes hard to navigate what structures. Let's put it this way: it is hard to navigate in terms of funding. What kind of structures can collaborate in the context of funding proposals, as we discussed before? Who do you approach? Because all of them speak different languages. Academia wants to publish papers. The entrepreneurs want to make money and build a company. And the public sector basically wants to provide the best policies and frameworks out there. So they speak different languages. They have different incentive structures. Bringing this into a cohesive piece, it's challenging. And here's my final say in this, Niels. Why not having new structures in place? Why not thinking outside of the box for a moment? And we can go back to reality in a second, but outside of the box, why not bringing these public-private academic relationships into a more cohesive, even legal entity structure that combines and integrates the best of all three? If it doesn't work, sure enough, then we'll throw it away. But why not give it a try?
But have you got more concretely an idea of how this should work?
Ask me in a few years. If my company survives until then I'm happy to tell you how it went.
Now, listen. When it comes to this triangle, naturally, it is always a good idea with public procurement as a driver for innovation, right? This is something that the Commission has been driving for many years. So public procurement and collaboration, especially university hospitals, for instance, that's probably one of the most, within your sector, one of the best examples of collaboration between the public and the private and academia. Yeah. You have a public hospital that works as a university. You have the university connected to university hospitals, but that's also very normal in Germany, where you're from, right? And then you have the industry, where there's a collaboration on medicine or pharmaceutical products. Yeah, that in that corner. So, but it needs to make sense, the collaborations, and I'm not saying that what the calls that the Commission throw out, they don't make sense, because the calls are a result of the stakeholders putting info and requests into the process of shaping the call text. There's a whole system that is based on input from the beneficiary and stakeholders. So that's in place. But what I'm trying to say is that what I would like this thing to be it is smaller. It doesn't have to be so big all the time. If you create a system where you have a lot of money for smaller things, for more smaller and focused things, and then let the collaboration that already works out. Again, we can take the university hospitals as a perfect microsphere here for a lab for our thoughts here. The collaboration is already there. You don't need to fund a lot of things with that through an EU project. They step into a collaboration and they develop something, but maybe it doesn't have to be a collaboration with 30 partners. Maybe it just needs to be a collaboration funded by the EU with five partners or 3 partners. And you have Eurostars there. You have some funding schemes that do these kind of things, but it's small.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, what you say resonates with me a little bit, at least in this context, not with financing per se, but there's microfinancing involved. It's maybe not that small microfinancing, because the term is used in low resource settings where you have like loans given away with like 10 euros or 10 US dollars. That's a completely different way. But the approach is the same direction, to say, why don't we have a little bit, much less money involved, but we put it on less stakeholders, and what they can do with the money is much more valuable to them, simply because they're a small, medium-sized company. They operate under different constraints, under different levels. But their acceleration, their speed, their innovativeness, that may actually stimulate long-term an entire ecosystem. And maybe, Niels, to extend that thought, it's not about just putting a lot of plants out there. I think it's also the way to orchestrate the plants. It's the way to say, well, who is connected with whom? And to what degree can all these startups learn from each other? I would even go that far and say, and I'm probably not very popular in that saying or thinking, but to think also outside the box, that these sectors that we've created, as in healthcare, agriculture, food, different sectors, I can only say that for the sake of low resource settings, let's say in Africa or in Southeast Asia that I've seen, those sectors don't matter. No, there is no product built for XYZ sector per se. Sure enough, there are, but the point is that the innovations are much more connected across sectors. And if you have a medtech innovation that is considered to be implemented in a hospital, the first thing you want to ask, do we have enough electricity involved? So you immediately bridge a different sector. And coming back to that ecosystem of startups that we talk about, I think we should identify these sectors. We should have a good landscape of what startups should be there, could be built. We need to have the freedom and the space to do that. We should incorporate the spaces that we already have at the university clinics and so forth. We don't need to build new buildings. We don't need to build new infrastructures. Not the point. But then, and that's the key message, connect them. Allow them to connect freely, openly in that space to develop something that's truly outside the box, without saying you need to develop this in XYZ years, and if you don't, then, well, money is gone and you're out of, not even into the market yet, but you're out of operation.
Yeah. And if you want to continue the line of thought, because I don't say that you should not have big projects. All I'm saying is that it should be for the right things.
Yeah.
So the innovation fund is a good example within especially the energy sector, right? That the things that are expensive and that are important that we develop and throw money into, and create a system for that that suits what you need. Because you can also, pharmaceutical is also a very expensive corner, yeah? Parts of pharmaceutical is very, very expensive. So you could, in principle, I might be wrong if I don't have the right knowledge about the depth of the sector and the area, but in principle, you could set up a same system, innovation fund system for the very expensive pharmaceutical research and commercialization of within that area. Where you have the big money and then have the growth foundation feed it with what it needs without it being so difficult to access the money, and be enough funding so it's not so difficult to get it.
Yeah, I mean, pharmaceuticals, look, I'm not an expert in it, but what I recently came across is, and this is a lessons learned for me, the pharmaceutical sector is basically working in an on-patent way, as in, like, you have a patent, you have a certain molecule, you have a certain product developed, and you put this into the market, and you make, over time, quite a lot of money with it, because the profit margins are quite large once the product is allowed to be in the market on patent. But once the patent is out, there's a new industry evolving. That's the biosimilar industry, in the sense that this is off-patented. So the question is there a way that we can combine this with other sectors? I recently attended a conference in Amsterdam on this, where we talked about health systems and what science can contribute in that sense. And well, it was dedicated to biosimilar products, meaning off patent. They're considered more cheap. They're considered easier, maybe not easier, but they're easier in the sense they're easier to manufacture in the sense that you don't have to adhere to so many different legal constraints. And yet there's a lot of capex involved. No doubt. There's a lot of financial investments involved. But the point is, can we combine that with existing, and I'll give you an example in a second, with existing industry, let's say for medtech. There are business models arising, and again, I'm looking outside of Europe here. There are business models arising in which, consider an Uber driver being a medical doctor sitting in a car, and that person is receiving a phone call like we do now, and consults the patients, has an observation with the patient, looks at the patient, and then has a certain choice to make whether or not the patient should be visited. Let's assume the patient is in an emergency and should be visited on site. Well, the Uber driver, not making advertisement for a specific company, but let's say there's a cab-based company driving out there, right? There you go. And then you have the ability to bring the doctor to the patient. That's the notion. And in some aspects and countries, you need that. First of all, because the patients are not aware of the system, they don't have the accessibility, they have a long distance to travel, they can't afford the consultation and so forth. So the doctor goes to the patient, and on the way, it picks up the medicines. So again, that is touching a little bit of the business model environment where I say, why don't we foster these kind of collaborations much more on a systematic level, bringing in the right funding schemes, letting the people build their startups, letting them connect this ecosystem properly, and then see what happens. Most likely something we haven't discovered yet.
Well, listen, you're breaching into the next block, so let's just do that. So what we've been discussing here, it's been a very nice discussion about what eventually would create lasting impact, right? Trying to change the system a little bit to not have all these patents sitting there. Now, you work in third countries in what you do. And one of the places that you're involved in, that's Bangladesh. So this next blog is a little bit of inspiration beyond outside the European border. So can you share a little bit, because you mentioned here and there now already in the conversation, what happens other places in the world with smaller funding and so on. But can you share a little bit about, give us some inspiration about what's going on out there?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Maybe two notes before we start on this, Niels. I would shy away from the terminology third world, because that's
third countries.
Third countries, okay.
Third countries. That was what I said.
Even though I like number 3, but maybe let's skip that terminology because it doesn't.
Third
resonate
countries
properly.
can also be Bosnia. So that's simply the legal term for countries that are not EU or yeah.
Yeah, I know, and this is maybe one of the reasons why I say that even in you will find it in any setting, there is a low resource context, and I don't know, I can't even call it 1 or 2 or 3, but the point is here, these settings per se are characterized by an environment in which you have a lot of constraints. So you have less financial availability on a household. You have perhaps not consistently approachable or available energy at home. You may have an unsafe environment per se. So this is a highly constrained environment, and that's my point. And interesting enough, and this is a fascination that I have for a few years now with a few concepts that arise from this setup, is to say these constraints, they foster innovation because people are not incentivized to innovate. They need to innovate.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go too far and say, okay, they need to innovate to survive. This is a little bit too blunt, but the pressure to innovate is built into the system. Yeah. So, and that being said, happy to give you an example of Bangladesh. And I may say I haven't seen it yet on site, but working on it. But first of all, the people I work with, they're very kind-hearted and open-minded and very bright in the way that they approach the world and their environment in specific. And what I've seen on site is from a telecommunication incumbent, I don't know if I can make advertisement here, but
do whatever you want. Nobody's going to come after you.
no, okay, that's what they all say. No, but there is a local telecommunication incumbent who decided to create a telemedicine app, as in there's doctor and patient interactions, over space and time. So, and I think this is a very fertile ground because you already have your customers, And here's my hinge towards the EU. Well, we have telemedicine in Europe, but we have it differently, and I'll tell you in a second why. So this company is dedicated to say we want to reach every individual in the country, in Bangladesh. And if correct me if I'm wrong on the numbers, but I think Bangladesh has 165 million people involved, so there are a lot of people to reach. And that being said, requires you to be very creative in approaching and accessing your patients. You don't even know who the patients are. Once you've discovered who the patient is, how can you track that over time? Because sometimes you don't even have the right information in front of you. You don't. The patient doesn't know how old the patient is, and so forth. All of that is not recorded as we know it from our environments in a, let's say, Western Hemisphere, or in a more developed setting, whatever you call this. Point is, you want to reach the patients, and what I've seen on site is just breathtaking. Not on site, but like from a distance for on site is breathtaking, because they have smaller units with doctors involved, with nurses involved, but small units. They go out to rural villages. They have their point of care diagnostic devices with them. They can measure the blood pressure. They can measure everything when it comes to the vital signs. And obviously, they have a connecting phone with the application involved, so they can consult further doctors in the network. That approach is also a B2C approach. So you can, as a consumer, call in a doctor for a fraction of the money that you would pay if you see a physical doctor on site. And that fraction, I can't relate the numbers, but it's less than 10 cents in Europe, where you say, seeing a doctor immediately, even for your children, that is tremendous, a tremendous benefit, versus I need to get to the other side of the city and see someone for a few minutes and pay so much money for it. So a big benefit on transportation, big benefit on health access. And then the final say on this is, if you consider this in a wider ecosystem, well, they've learned over time that the application they built for B2C is not just for B2C. They put this now also in kiosks. And the kiosks, you can imagine just a stroll in grocery store or a stroll in pharmaceutical area. Well, you have a screen like this we have right now here. And then you get a nurse who is also giving you the pharmaceuticals, and then you go home and you're good to go. And these kiosks are spreading all over the country to make sure it works. Last sentence, and very much intriguing part, they also put this on boats, simply because they have many water streets. And the lessons learned from all of this is embrace the environment, embrace the challenges and constraints that you encounter, use them as fertile ground, as fuel for your innovation. And that is maybe an inspiration also for the European Union itself. We don't have these challenges. We don't have the water streets to overcome, maybe in Venice, but that's a different challenge. So these are not so much constrained countries or settings, and that's why it's different.
No, what you want, so the thing here, you cannot replicate the scarcity.
No.
And you cannot replicate the frame, because it's very, very different framework conditions. So, and it is absolutely true. This is also to our race, man. When we are facing a challenge, there's always an entrepreneurial spirit, and that has been back to when we evolved from apes into humanity. This is why we are who we are. We are entrepreneurs per se. We're innovators that find a solution to a challenge. And there are many ways there. And the lesser resources we have, or the more challenges we have, there's always going to be someone who said, we need to solve this in one way or the other. A brilliant mind that finds an idea to create a solution. The more wealthy you are, the less industrious you get.
Ironic,
that's a statement. That's I don't know if I can back that up by any any fact. But the more self you get, the more comfortable you get. You're not forced to find the solution to your problems, right?
No,
And
no.
obviously, this is an inspiration to because they, with less resources, they find the solution to something. But it's something that you should always bear in mind because you should not, when you start to forget to be entrepreneurial, then you're also losing in the long term, right? So this is the problem that this continent has. This is what everybody talks about when it comes to our funding system, how it works. This is why they're talking about a competitiveness fund for the new framework, for the new budget. Yeah, that we need to remove rules and regulations because America and Asia, they don't have these kinds. It's easier for them to support these industrious minds that come up with good ideas. There's too much of red tape and bureaucracy here. There's too many things to overcome to block and bottleneck the good idea. Yeah, that's what it's in. It's in a sense to fertilize the good idea and not kill it and drown it with rules and regulations, and why you have to do that.
Yeah, the comparison is I think all your points I highly agree with. I only shy away from a direct comparison between Europe, Asia, and the US, because I would argue that, especially in the US, and I can't argue that for Asia, and I don't have the numbers on my plate now, but I know that the private sector investments from the United States is much more heavy and much heavier than from a European perspective. So if you're a private investor and if you want private equity spread into a system, you want to be in the US, and you want to benefit from that in the US. The regulation around receiving money, and also, look, it's not just about money. Let's put it this way. Even having access to the funds doesn't show and doesn't relate to true impact, as we outlined in the beginning of the episode. So I think a key challenge and the difference between Europe and the US, and I can say this being a little bit part of both worlds, because I've lived in the United States for 7 years, the trial and error and the ability to fail and the willingness to fail and to come out stronger afterwards in the US is not comparable to the European setup and mindset at all. If a European fails, and I can't say this for every individual in every country, that's not the point, but in tendency, if you fail once, well, you feel like you've been marked. Something is bad from you. And I can only say that from the spirit that I've gotten in the United States. Well, you fail, you learn from it, you stand up again, you try again until it works. It's the next step in the iteration.
It's cultural.
It's cultural, right? It's not just money, it's also cultural and mindset. And we shouldn't neglect that fact as well.
That's a very good bridge to the next block, rethinking impact in future EU projects. Yeah.
Big words.
We've been talking a lot about this, rethinking impact in future EU projects. We've been giving our 2 cents, 5 cents, €1 offers on rethinking this. What we have here in the rundown is social business model, sustainability beyond project funding, AI and lower barriers to innovation. Now, what have you dotted down in this block?
I wouldn't overemphasize the role of AI, because everybody does, first of all. And I look at this from a conservative point of view, because I think AI remains a tool. We've built impressive, models that can at least ease and enhance our abilities as human beings. That's completely fine. But let's be human beings and remain that a tool, so we can stay in charge and everything else. So I wouldn't over-exaggerate that role. But what I can say is, in the context of social impact, I want to go back to the point of building new legal entities and allowing these legal entities to thrive under the current, let's say, transformation that we're going through. And to maybe contextualize this a little bit further, let me break down what I mean by transformation. What I see is that we have a highly competitive landscape. across the pond, as in like the United States is backed by billions of dollars from the US government to make an ecosystem flourish and work. Then we have Asia, in some degrees not even transparent for the European market per se, but they're building AI tools that are open source, and they work much more elegantly, much more leaner, much more frugal, and readily available, open source. Yeah. So all of that being said, I would think that we need to think of the big, let's say, forces that drive us. And one of the forces is for sure the ability to build these ecosystem for an innovation process. That leads me a little bit to the point of saying, what kind of infrastructures, legal entities could we bring up as Europe? And I want to go back a little bit in history and say, well, we have been masters in the sense of a universal education system at one point in time. Yeah, you look at the old Greek system where you did not have one discipline, where you did not have many disciplines, and let's say mathematics and natural science and everything else that came much later in the historical context. Why don't we build a novel form of education where students thrive under a more universal teaching, and that teaching encompasses different sectors, different perspectives, different paradigms to look at. And when they do, they, over time, create enough knowledge on their own. And here's my kicker to the startup then, to start transitioning the knowledge they gained into an action of building, let's say, a company. And there are many examples. Let me not go into that in detail, but point is, the knowledge they build in the university system, they need to transition this into a company structure. And maybe this is a one-person company. That's completely fine. But they are able to use their knowledge in a monetary way. And that is to be framed under the umbrella of a wider ecosystem. And my point in all of this is to say, why don't we build legal entities that encompass the notion of education in a much wider and open theme, as I just outlined, for-profit entities that are intended to do social good, that are intended to build social entrepreneurs, and that allows a system to foster in a wider ecosystem, as we discussed before. And then the public sector comes in and says, okay, well, let's learn from this, bottom up. What did work here? What didn't? Why did it not work? Can we improve anything in our system to make it work? And that is a frame that can be built over time. Right now, I do see these three things very much fragmented, very much distinct. And I'd like to see that much more connected in light of the complex problems that we all face. Not diving into the details here, but I think we all have a picture of what the big problems could be.
Yeah. You know what? One of the most extraordinary proofs of innovation and impact, you know what that is right now?
Tell me.
There's a development of new military technology because of the Ukraine war. So the way that the Ukrainian defense industry is working in their innovation processes, it's a model in my view. It's a model of replication of how to have fast-moving innovation impact in what you do. Now, you cannot replicate a war because that is a pressure model that you cannot replicate in other innovation areas. But what I'm saying, or what I'm trying to say, is that the reason why they have moved so fast is, of course, the pressure of dying. Eliminating their existence as a country, right? But what they put into the innovation process is a fast-moving answer, question, reply. So they send something out, it gets back, this doesn't work, we're just here. Goes into thousands of different SMEs sitting under the literally under the ground in basement companies that then send it back to the front, back, forth. That kind of, you cannot replicate that in one-on-one. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that you have other areas that are of importance for us, right? where we need to stress. There's water quality. There's soil fertilizing that doesn't pollute climate, all kinds of climate, flooding because of climate change, right? There are other pressure tests where you can maybe put it into the system within health. Reply, answer, reply. If we can shorten the response time and get a system where it's much more focused and laser instead of these big. But I don't mind the big projects, but I would just like to see a system where it's a little bit more focused and laser sharp on a specific issue, and then a few stakeholders work on that together and reduce the response time to the impact. Because then, I don't know. Does it make sense what I say?
Yeah, of course it makes sense, and I'm trying to pick it apart in the sense of how can we incentivize this in our systems. I think the big challenge that you may have also in the Ukraine is the lack of materials. So it's not just the response time that you're indicating, as in like feedback back and forth, but it's also the fact that they have limited amount of resources available, and that leads to creative ways and human ingenuity to overcome the challenges that they have.
Yeah.
Aside from the money and aside from the purpose of war, which is to be debated in that sense, but all of that aside, we have enough complex challenges in the world. We have water drainages. We don't know if beyond 2050 we have enough water on the planet to feed our system and to feed our people. We don't have a coping strategy against that. We have not figured out how to cope with climate change in the sense that how can we survive a planet that goes, and we see this summer again, at least in a European zone that I'm in here, going beyond 35 degrees Celsius. Yeah. And this is something that we barely touch upon. But the challenge with all of this is, there is always this picture in my mind, and I'm sure you know it. It's like this pond of roses on a sea, and it's populating over time, and it's happening. There's one rose in the beginning, it populates. The second day there are 2 roses, and then there are 4, there are 6, and so 4, 8, and 16, and so forth. And the day before the pond is completely covered, that is just one day ahead of total extinction. So this is the kind of dilemma that we're facing. We don't see the direct impact of all these phenomenon right away. And when you say, well, let's focus on one thing. Let's go to, let's say, the sub-Saharan desert and repopulate the desert with a lot of trees. There are projects out there that do that. People go there. They want to see that happening. There's a fascinating project from the World Food Program that I discovered a few years ago. They build half moons. They dig a hole in the sand, and then rain falls in. It's a specific kind of design, and then over time there is a whole forest flourishing.
Yeah.
Fascinating. That's an issue. Should all tackle it. But here's the challenge, Niels. Who's going there? Who's doing this systematically? Not just me and you. We have 2 weeks off. Who's doing this consistently? Who's incentivized to do it? And that is, I think, an overall optimization problem to say, what problem do we as a human society truly want to tackle next? Because we are living in fragmented, siloed environments that doesn't allow us to look at these ponds, that doesn't allow us to look at these islands and say, let's go there and fix things.
Let's just move into the reflection part here. Because I'm going to ask you about your reflections, but my reflections is first and foremost, I've been zooming very much out talking about man as a race, right? What we've been from dawn of time. But the fact is, we always manage. So what's going to happen But I always said, I said this for many years to anybody who wanted to listen to this, even to friends 10, 20 years ago, nothing is going to really happen until we have water, we walk in water to the ankles and to the knees here. Then politicians would tell the real impact measures that needs to be done with climate change, because there's always going to be people say, oh, there's no, because they have a political interest, because there are voters that can't be bothered taking the rough decisions, right? There are always voters out there to say, this is all bullshit. It's nothing is going to really happen when we stand in shit. But then things will happen. We will build the dikes like the Dutch. We will do the measures that needs to be taken. The politicians that say these kind of things, they will be eradicated because people can see they were wrong. But it's not going to happen until we really see it. Yeah, until we are the European Bangladesh. We will have water everywhere. And then we will handle it. Then we will handle it, and we will handle it.
Yeah, Niels, without going into the reflection too much, but I think here we have two pathways unfolding. So what you're saying is, well, if the politicians realize and acknowledge and act upon, then things will change. I don't think that's the case. And I don't know about the situation in Bangladesh, but what I know for sure is it was not just based on political pressure, not just based on that. And so there are many stakeholders who wanted an ecosystem for telemedicine, and that involved very much so the private sector. Yeah? And I don't say, well, we all go to private sector now, so everything is fine. And when they say we do this, the world is a better place. It's not the point. But I would shy away from saying we need to wait for someone. We need to wait for an authority to step in and say, now we tackle this problem. I agree with you. That's what happens. That's what happens usually. Yeah. But that's why I advocate for structures, legal entities that to some degree have a more freedom approach and a more not autark, that's not the point, but a more open way to act upon a certain problem and issue. And if we wait for someone to act, well, sure enough, we will wait a long time. And we will scratch our heads until the problem is vanished, or we will not be here anymore. Yeah. So my point is, I would not wait for someone to step in. I would rather say, okay, how important is that problem to be solved for me, for my family, for my environment, for everything that I do in my daily living? And then find the right people. Find the right people, find the politicians, find the private companies, find the policymakers, find the ones that are concerned with these things and put them in a room and make them work. That's, I think, a much more orchestrated level of approaching it. Obviously, I'm fully aware this is very idealistically speaking. The reality is much more complicated than that.
The commission would say we already do that.
The commission is, and it would not be wrong in saying it, but it could not hurt in further extension to say, well, if you're doing it right, why not approach it with this XYZ innovation or this XYZ angle? Yeah, I would take the opportunity and say, well, if you're doing this right and you bring out the right policies, then let's enforce them. Let's see how far we can push the policies into practice. And if it breaks, if it gets decoupled, let's figure out the points where it doesn't. Fair enough. Maybe that is not happening the way that we wanted to see, but there's always room for improvement.
Yeah. If we're supposed to zoom in on the individual person or individual consortium that sits and work with these kind of things to give them some sort of advice they can use, because they cannot use the fact that we are sitting and talking about politicians and the whole system. So the individual partnership project that sits and work with a proposal writer right now, sitting preparing proposals for this autumn calls. Is there anything we can
are you asking for low-hanging fruit, as in like can we do it for in the immediate terms? Well, we can create awareness. What you're doing right now is a great way to do it, Niels, and that's why I appreciate it, the way to talk about this, not because of me, but because of also opening a discussion, creating dialogue. That's a very important piece. Also, one thing that I would like to note in this discovery is the way that we as a society wants to be and wants to create the best environment requires a lot of listening and requires also a lot of attention to the other person listening. Let it be a politician, let it be an industry leader, let it be a policymaker, anyone, a researcher. I think we should listen more to each other. We should come closer in the sense that we should see much more what combines us rather than what segregates us and what differentiates us. We should see the combining aspect of strength when we say, you're doing good in XYZ research and you're doing good in XYZ policy making. How can we bring this together into a combined project? We should embrace much further the differences that we have. We're not equal. We're not meant to be equal. Never was, never will be. And I want to raise one more thing, and that has nothing to do with the show, but it's something that I'm intrigued by in the last years in specific is outside of the politics, outside of the business, and outside of how we want to be as a society, I also want to at least create the impulse of saying what stands much above us. Why do we do what we do? Yeah, and we don't have to take this on a spiritual journey or on a belief system or anything, but what is the reasoning why you're doing this show? What is the reasoning why I'm doing this for the research? Why XYZ politician is doing? And I think here lies a potential true motivator for each one of us, but like in a collective way as well, to find common ground. Yeah. This is the way that we can connect. That's the low-hanging fruit if you want to look for it. What is the true purpose and the meaning behind what we're doing? And then find the right people who are doing similar things with a similar meaning, similar intent and incentive.
Yeah. On that note, we move into the last block, the toughest challenge.
All right.
So the toughest challenge from your point of view in relation to getting real impact?
That we don't know what impact is. I mean, let's define it. Give me one sentence on impact. I'll give you another. Let's ask a third person. We will get 3 or 4 answers. What is impact? I don't know. I think what matters is that impact is not necessarily positive connotated. You can have negative impact on a societal, group. I think what matters, like I said in the beginning, it's not the activity to create impact for no good reason. There needs to be a purpose behind. There needs to be a motivation. There needs to be an incentive. Understanding that is much more worthwhile also for an individual development than just creating impact, because then it relates to an action without consequence. Fair enough. I think we have enough of that. We should always ask maybe what could be the impact for the other, maybe not for us. So shift the direction, shift the perspective on saying, I want to create impact, fair enough. But when I do so, what does that do to the other person, to the other group, to the other nation, to the other whatever, to even an abstract form like nature? What does that do? Shift the perspective. And then maybe one thing to let go on this matter is to say, okay, what if impact is created? Let's say there is a positive way. Let's say we fly to the Mars. I mean, there are a few individuals who have great and big visions on let's go to Mars. That's creating impact, I guess. Let's assume for now. Is that impact still an impact in 20 or 50 or 100 years? Maybe. Is it still a positive one? I don't know. But the point is, let's consider impact over generations. Let's not consider impact. I need to create impact because I have a great business idea and put my business footprint in the world and then hope for the best. Let's think of let's try to think of what would my consequence and impact be 100 years from now when I'm long dead? What is that impact? What do I truly want to achieve? Why am I truly here? Why am I trying to seek that thing? And then define it was what this impact is. Not being in favor of, but still intrigued by. There was a thought from Jeff Bezos a few years back, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, where he put a huge clock in the middle of nowhere. Maybe it was a myth, but it doesn't matter. It's just the symbolism behind. And he put the clock, that's what I at least remember. Maybe it's different, but he put the clock in the year 3000. So the clock itself is spinning in the year 1,000 years from now. For what reason? Nobody's looking at this thing anyway. But it could be a reminder of saying, what is the impact that we want to generate, not for now, not for the people that we know, but for the people and generations much long after us. Mm-hmm. And that can give us freedom. That can give us the freedom to say we don't have to do it right away. We don't have to be rushed. We don't have to pull all the strings ourselves. We're here for a group, for a longer period, and this longer period has lots of generations afterwards. But maybe we can create the framework and the conditions that create the impact. And that is a much more releasing and relieving argument to say, I have to create an XYZ innovation for XYZ purpose.
So we're flying above the sky here, my dear listeners. It's nice to get a more philosophical approach to the ending of an episode. Thank you so much, Christoph.
My pleasure.
We'll need to wrap this up. So I'm just going to land the plane before we say goodbye to the listeners. So dear listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode. It's been a wonderful conversation to have. Now, if you want to hear and listen to more of this, you should go to my website, thegrant.eu. There's lots of content there. There's more than 230 episodes now, and there's lots of episodes on impact. So go and check it out. And when you get in there and you see, wow, this is great stuff. How can I support this guy? You can do that by joining my email list. That's the best way to support an independent podcaster like myself. There's an online form on every single of my sub pages there. So thanks in advance for that. Finally, of course, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where the fun happens. That's where the flow is. Niels Tudor Winther. I'm the only person in the world with that name, so you should be able to find me. And go and like the Grant page. Follow that also on LinkedIn. That's where my community connects. That's more than 500 followers in there. Still growing continuously. And there, if you have anything you want to share, just like Christopher here, anything you want to share with the community, reach out. You might be on the show as a guest. I think that's that. Christopher, thanks for your time. Thanks for reaching out. And we will be connecting. So there might be more content coming out from conversations between you and me. More on that later. So thanks.
Thank you, Niels. It was a pleasure to be on the show.
Now let's say goodbye to the dear listeners. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Grant. All the Grant episodes have their own site on the Grant website. You'll find the link to the episode site where you listen to your podcast. On the site for this episode, you'll find a link to Christopher's LinkedIn site. Further, you'll find links to TU Delft and his holding company in case you have an interest in that. Next week, I have a very nice episode zooming in on RTOs and how they work. You can indeed look forward to that.